weekly chamber webinar where each week we bring you industry experts to cover the topics that you have told us will help you. The cyber threat landscape is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and as such, the tools you need to defend against and combat them is also needing to evolve. Covid-19 has thrown many of us into new home-based ways of working, which we had to achieve very quickly. And this has left the due diligence that we would ordinarily undertake around our systems somewhat lagging behind. So I'd like to start by introducing us. I'm Heather Myers, the CEO of South and Mid Wales Chambers of Commerce. Joining me is Paul Slevin, who is the President of the Chamber and the Chair of the Board of Directors. And introducing our experts today, a very warm welcome to David Clarke. David is the Chair of the Fraud Advisory Panel and COVID-19 Fraud Watch. David brings a wealth of experience from his time at City Police and Guildhawk. And David's going to cover COVID-19 fraud risks, anticipated or emerging issues, and some preventative tips. And a warm welcome also to Mike Parfitt, who is the CEO of Caerphilly-based Team Metalogic, who will cover up-to-date information on cybersecurity and the implications for working in new ways now and in the future. So on to today, I will hand over to Paul, who will take us through how the session is going to work.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody, and thank you indeed to our two presenters. Before we move to them, just a couple of housekeeping rules, if I can. Because of the number of people on this call, we have decided to make all of the participants mute from the point of view that you can't verbally contribute. So what we'd ask you to do is to use the Q&A panel, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and upload your questions as they come to you. Please feel free to be prolific in your questions. The more you ask, the more you'll understand, and the more our contributors will be able to hopefully solve some of the problems for you. Please also do be aware that while the whole issue of cybersecurity is moving quite quickly, none of the advice that you'll hear today is formal and definitive advice. If you are looking for more information on that, please feel free to reach out to David and to Mike individually, and they'll be able to give you the latest information as it arises. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available shortly after this, both on social media and on the South Wales Chamber of Commerce .co.uk website, where it will be posted, and it can be downloaded easily. If you've already attended and you wish to refer it to others, then please feel free to do so. It's a simple matter of them just subscribing to that and taking it down. So at the very end of this webinar, we'll have a short survey. It's important you complete this, if you would please, because that actually tells us not just how good our presenters are and how good the questions are, but more importantly, it tells us the issues that affect you and how we can continue to evolve and improve this program over time. Our next webinar is as yet uncharted, primarily because we obviously have a bank holiday weekend coming up. Next Friday, the 8th of May, is a bank holiday, but there will be another one posted very shortly during next week, which you're very welcome to subscribe to. So with that, I think we're done on the housekeeping rules. If I may just ask David to take us through it.
Good morning, and thanks ever so much for that very kind introduction, and also for kindly inviting us to speak. I've got obviously a few minutes of slides. I'm going to give you some details. We can go on to the next slide. This is me here. I'm going to look at the purpose of this is to give you some of the current COVID-19 fraud risks, which are actually you'll see very traditional frauds, but it's just the scale of them that's gone up. Also talk through some of the emerging threats and issues, and then most of all what we're seeing is the best preventive tips to protect your business. The last thing you want, clearly, and companies I'm speaking with, you know, with cash flow issues and furloughing, the last thing you want is £30,000 going off to a bogus firm because of a mistake. So what I'm hopefully going to give you is everything I do with fraud advisory and my company, my role, and tell you some of the ways that we can do that in the least griefy. You've got enough worries to worry about. This is hopefully going to give you solutions that work simply. Go to the next slide. About me, I'm what am I talking about this, and what's the Guildhawk bit all about? I'm the chair of the Fraud Advisory Panel. We've been around, as I'll explain, for quite a long time, 21 years. And I also set up with Cabinet Office and others the COVID-19 Fraud Watch, and I'll explain why that is. But my background, I'm in business now. I'm a director and head of integrity and security at Guildhawk. We're an international software and language-enabled business. But we do a lot of sensitive work. My background, though, is in policing. I was Air Force, and I've worked in the UN as an investigator, and ended up as the head of fraud squad in City London Police, and was in Wales a lot and across the country and overseas when we set up the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. But that's a whole different story, and I'm still involved in bits of that. Next slide, please. My background, and this is a funny side, I just put this in at the last minute yesterday because this was something I did with training for the OECD 2 years ago, and I kept using this slide. So I used this slide back in 2017-18. Talked about some of the things I saw when I was in policing. When I left the Royal Air Force Police and thought Northern Ireland was a bit of a sticky situation. Then came out, joined the City of London. I said, trouble seemed to follow me with those riots in Trafalgar Square that I was on duty at. 1991, the attack on the Stock Exchange, then the 92 bomb at St Mary Axe, followed a year later by Bishopsgate, the £1 billion bomb. Then the anti-capitalist riots. I worked on the intel side of that, and then I was liaison with the various communities on the 2008 attacks. And then fraud squad when we had the financial crisis, and all the mortgage fraud side, the subprime derivatives, how much did we know about that, what was happening, and when we eventually, the US started prosecuting offenders for criminality and fraud during that financial crisis. And I asked always the question when I was in Europe, saying, so what next in 2020? I had certain views, and it's turned out rather different, but you'll see some of the things that have come out. Next slide, please. Who the Fraud Advisory Panel is. We are a charity. I, like my other trustees, we are counter fraud professionals, and we primarily help business. We give advice and support. We do lobbying for government. We're all counter fraud professionals. I'm the chairman. I'm very fortunate, but I'm probably one of the least qualified in many respects. My deputy chairman and chairman. I've got partners and barristers and business leaders who we all freely give of our time. We pay to be members, and we have a corporate membership as well. But we've successfully championed various things. We do an annual report, all free on there. Please go and have a look. We've championed around businesses behaving badly. This is becoming very topical. And we run the International Charity Fraud Awareness Week with the Charity Commission, and we'll be probably doing that again virtually this year. And that's where you'll see me occasionally going on TV and talking about these various steps that charities need to do. Next slide, please. And then the COVID-19, I discussed this with Cabinet Office and the police, saying, look, the issue here, just like this talk, and I'm so grateful to the Chambers of Commerce and Department for International Trade for getting this message out. You've invited me to all manner of groups. What I am doing here, there are groups already, as you can imagine, whenever we have major incidents, terrorism and fraud, the police and banks predominantly and government will come together in rapid time and put in place things. My concern is I've worked in all these areas, and being in a private held business now who helps a lot of people, is that doesn't get out to certain quarters where the criminals target. And the villains don't go after they do go after the strong ones, and I'll explain why, but generally they go after cash-rich businesses, a little bit naive, haven't got anybody in there, and they do lots of con tricks, old-fashioned tricks. So this is to get people together, and we meet every week. We've been doing it religiously now, 45 minutes, a little bit like yours, but it's a conference call. We share intelligence, and what I'm going to give you, if we move on, is what's come from those groups. I obviously can't give you all the highly sensitive stuff because that goes straight into the National Economic Crime Centre and police and Cabinet Office. So what are the fraud risks? Well, I'll just start with next slide. you know, what I'm going to tell you, please, some of it sounds pretty horrific and scary, and numbers are scary. The great thing is, there's been, honestly, I'm talking as an outsider here in business, I'm really reassured by how Britain has come together internationally as well with our partners. Things like you're doing today to get this all coming together. No competition, let's just get the thing out. And we are seeing spikes, but let's look at what we're benchmarking against. Pre-pandemic fraud and the cyber landscape. These are EY and ONS figures and PwCs. You know, fraud, when we started counting it, is the most, fraud and cybercrime are the most prevalent offences anyway. This is around, you know, because we've got people online, the villains are always ahead. Fraudsters, you know, they're the most scheming, horrible people, and they use all the tools like paedophiles. Actually, they hunt down people in the same way. Have no care. Very, very awful characters, but they're enabled by technology. And as other crimes fall, and as we've seen, I think that's terrific. They've gone online and they're doing other things, and I'll show you. But that's where they were. And one of the biggest threats, and it says it there, is insiders and technology and certain people within insiders. And that hasn't changed. So they're the ones where I'll show how we do risk assessment and what to look out for. Next slide. What we are seeing, this is as of yesterday's meeting, just put these in from there. This is our data I can share. Payment diversions and mandate fraud coming from our banks and colleagues. We're seeing attempts to divert, and this is all around people being home working and stuff. Controls are in place, but without the face-to-face and perhaps being able to, you know, socially engineer somebody to try to get and break those controls. I would have thought there'd been more of this, including local authorities. They're getting targeted as well. People trying to con them. But I would have thought there'd be more. But actually, what seems to have happened, I don't know if you're the same as our company, but we've actually, you know, really locked down. It comes to directors for even a small bill payment. Actually, that's not a bad thing. I know it's going to be slow for payments, but what isn't at the moment? But stopping that payment diversion. Identity fraud is up. There's reports of this also from BCC and others around, you know, concerns about people using your identity to apply for loans and aid. This is very similar to what we've seen after other disasters. The US had it with Hurricane Katrina many years ago. People suddenly coming out with details. Be careful of misinformation campaigns. There's talk around, oh, there's a cure here, and a dreadful situation in the Middle East where people have been buying things. And the misinformation will be, you know, you buy this and then, you know, need an advance fee for it, but you can't get it. Another one that's odd, malware, I'm sure Mike will talk more about this, I won't touch, but online fraud. There's just been a spike in number of reports going in about people with, you know, pets, fraudsters selling pets online, agreeing to get them over. I imagine people lonely, wanting a creature, and, you know, and so they've got onto that. They're always ahead of the game, and of course then they say, oh, I can't get it because of COVID. It's been, the special tax got to be paid, or there's transport. Can you pay some more money? They've got you. And then we're seeing pension liberation has been big for many years. The fear is now, and we're starting to see it creep up, is as people perhaps start to panic about dividend payments, returns on what were previously seen as solid investments and equities, is right, you know, here they're at it. And this is where they've worked remotely, the criminals. A lot of them are Brits. This is what my teams did when I ran Fraud Squad. We ran the National Boiler Room, share me selling scams. They were all often in Spain, they're targeting the UK and Florida, looking at professionals, horrible people, and they come across very convincing. We had a major operation in the City of London, still running, I think, Operation Broadway, with Metropolitan City and Trading Standards, going to these places and finding them, you know, and shutting them down. But it's a very difficult task. Data breaches you'll hear more of. CEO fraud, if you're not aware, is generally the, you know, I'm pretending to be the CEO, I send an email, but they're much more sophisticated in that when you read it, often they'll base it on other data, may have signatures, photographs, language sounds very similar, bottom line for that one, I'll cover it now, is ring up the person. Actually ring the number you've got for somebody in finance. Let's just check this the payment. And phishing, which I'm sure Mike will go into. Next one. What are the anticipated emerging ones? Well, next slide. Spread of misinformation about corona. This, what I just touched on there, this Middle East, an email purporting as a cure. It's reported over 700 deaths. Now, you know, when certain people, public figures go on saying about drinking disinfectant or something sarcastically or whatever, I'm sorry, you know, the fraudsters were there before you, sir. Government support schemes, including business interruptions, we're seeing that. With the work we're doing with City Police and Cabinet Office, as I say, I've been really impressed. I could share it if it were of interest, but the control measures that have very quickly gone in, and we've been privy to this and fed in, and they've made additions. Data matching, the National Fraud Initiative, we brought other groups together. So Cabinet Office, lots of controls, so that if the money goes out, verification's being done, and they'll claw it back. I think there's some other things need doing, but I won't go into that. That's for later. But clearly, if somebody's already applied for you, or somebody's ringing you up saying, actually, I can help you get your claim here, people are falling for it. They're desperate, and it's understood. What are the serious organised crime groups doing? All those people that did all the bad stuff, where are they? You know, my streets, I live in just on the outskirts of the City of London, East End, and where are all these gangs? Where have they gone? Well, you can bet what they're doing is they're working up, and even after the pandemic, this COVID is a blessing. They're looking at all sorts of schemes to do this, how they'll go through future frauds. Organised crime as well, I said there, the pension liberation, fraud and investment schemes. Oh, here's the greatest new cure, do you know about this? I'm sorry, but you know, it's usually middle-aged men who are educated and well off that fall for this. Crazy. Phishing emails, again, I'll leave that to Mike. Bogus claims for the job retention scheme. Again, let's get the money out. I don't know about you, but we've said this with British Chamber and lobbying ourselves to Parliament with our chairman and CEO. Get the money out, but make sure we know who it's gone to and we recover it. And there's a few other things we're going to be working on the next few weeks. Next slide. And then some simple preventative tips. Here we go. Next slide. And they really are one of the things I'll pick up on. Here's a case. I seem to have got labelled as like the romance fraud expert with a beeb at one time, and doing stuff on world service, because Brits and people around the world, it's usually in English, targeting lonely hearts. And I helped, these two characters here were linked to a case that, you know, you might remember. It was one of my clients, actually one of our company's clients, a friend who'd fallen into this investment scam through a romance, allegedly with the Caucasian guy, and then meeting that guy on the right in London at a meeting, and gave over eventually 1.6 million, you know, and was embarrassed. And a professional lady sold properties. Another lady in Kent also did £1 million. You know, these won't often get reported. A lot of frauds won't get reported until later. Welfare of your staff, when you're looking at this, one of the things, particularly if people are on their own, men and women, think about this thing. The normal way that these come out is people tell a friend. If you're not with a friend, you're not going for a coffee or a glass of wine with them, it doesn't come out. And they are really, they've gone off the actual dating website and gone on to email and Twitter and stuff. But this is just an example of social engineering. The fraudsters love this, and lots of money. So remote training, when you put it in, keep it light-hearted, but don't be embarrassed. Next one. And then real things, suspicious emails. There's a site set up there. You'll get these afterwards. But report phishing. Phishing has just been lots and lots of the reports going into National Fraud Intelligence Bureau are phishing attacks. I got just after, you know, yesterday after coming off the call, I got a call from a lady who's found my number. And she's got one, very vigilant. She says, this doesn't look right, deleted. There's a number come through. How do I get this out to my friends? So I gave her that. She says, right, I'm sending them over to there. And then they will bring these down. The Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales are one of our backers at the charity. They've got an event coming up. It's a free event. a webinar, feel free to join that, particularly target at smaller firms. I won't go into the Zoom because I'm sure Mike will cover that, but there is the National Cybersecurity Centre's best practice, and we're pushing this out. A lot of people are concerned about that. Next slide. And lastly, one of the best tips really is report suspicions. Go on to Twitter, Action Fraud, that unit that I was involved in setting up. You know, I know there've been lots of challenges about that company that runs it. The actual service is unique, best in the world by getting the data in. They data match, and the 5,000 sites, you'll see Mike talking about them. This is where they find the IP addresses, they put in, get permission, then bring these down, and reporting phishing. Fraudulent text you can send off to Ofcom, and if you've given any bank details at this time, as quick as possible onto the banks, because they are putting in they've moved a lot onto digital. You can imagine everything's gone digital from branches. They're getting up to speed now. They're putting a sort of confirmation of payee, and they're putting in algorithms to check, particularly with backs. Try and do backs if ever you can. And that's with businesses particularly, do your backs, because if you're sending other ways, you know, the tracking mechanisms that Barclays and others put in won't pick up that these are suspicious. Next one. And lastly, that's us. If you go online, Fraud Advisory Panel, all our resources there written by fabulous people, really succinct guidance on due diligence, how to check, what to do in response. All free. We have webinars that are all free. If you want to join, it's only 60 quid a year or something. If you're a corporate joining. My company, Guildhawk on the right there, we're international, but we're based in London and Sheffield, and you know, we've got a great network. One of the points I would say is, you know, a lot of things I always talk about is due diligence, and that's it. Wherever you're trading around the country or the world, is your due diligence. I've had a lovely thing with some friends and colleagues over in China and other parts of the world sending me PPE for the thing. They've got some of the boxes here, you know. Knowing your people, doing your due diligence, you all know that, you know, that's why you're a great network, and why the British Chambers are a fabulous network. Lots of people don't know that, don't do it. So that's kind of it. So that's me really. There we are. If I can help at all, then please contact us. We'd be more than happy to assist.
Well, welcome again, and good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Parfitt. I'm going to follow David now and talk to you about understanding your cybersecurity posture, but specifically how that's changing in today's workplaces. It's something that we've really been calling the 2020 problem, but it's quickly really become known now as the COVID problem. So a few years ago, the threat landscape, it looked very different than it does today. Traditional approaches to cybersecurity, they originally focused on things like threat detection and protection. This would have been your firewalls, your antivirus, etc. And now with the rise of modern workforces, round-the-clock connectivity and access to cloud, it's transformed how we're doing business, but also how these threats are developing. The innovations have increased in both the complexity and the vulnerability of our computer networks. This makes it much easier for cyber criminals to exploit. And all of this was before COVID-19. Since January, the situation has unfortunately gotten a lot worse. In some cases, it's become more opportunistic, and in others, more complex and more cunning. But at what cost? Just over 60% of ransomware victims are small businesses by definition. In addition, the average downtime caused by these ransomware attacks, it's now increased from just 6 days at the end of 2018 to over 16 days just a year later. And the average cost of that downtime to businesses now stands at over $140,000 per incident. These are numbers that we don't even want to be contemplating when we're already struggling to balance the books given the current economic situation. David touched on a few stats earlier, and on the screen now there's our, I suppose, most recent top 10 stats on cybersecurity. So take a moment to take in some of those figures, but what I think is key here is that according to the NCSA, that's the United States National Cybersecurity Alliance, 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack. But with 95% of those breaches being traced back to some form of human error, the easiest and the most cost-effective means of defending against these attacks is simply user education. Just by increasing your investment in employee training and awareness, be that time or money, the stats show that this increase in their cyber literacy will then reduce the risk of a successful attack by between 45 and 70%. So what have we got to be worried about? The majority of these attacks start with email scams. David mentioned phishing, but spear phishing and whaling or CEO fraud are all examples of these attacks and scams via email. And the purpose of these attacks are simply to exploit the weakest link in the chain, and that's human error. And why? Well, it's quite simply because people always seem to fall for it. According to a recent report by FishMe, 91% of the time, phishing emails are behind a successful cyber attack on a business. So how confident are you that you or your employees wouldn't fall for such a phishing scam? Let's look at what COVID's got to do with all this, I guess. In short, it presents an opportunity. We've got a global population that are living through unprecedented times now. Many are uncertain, many are afraid. Most are in isolation, social distancing, lockdown. Many are on furlough and finding themselves with an awful lot more free time than usual. All of these types of people, the uncertain, the fearful, the anxious, the bored, they're all turning to online materials for answers or for explanations, or often just for something to do. In the last couple of months has seen a dramatic increase in COVID-19 related opportunistic attacks and social engineering. So let's just have a look at a few real world examples of those. The World Health Organization, they've reported a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks against them since the start of the pandemic. Their email addresses and passwords have been leaked online, and the organization is constantly being impersonated by cyber criminals on a daily basis. They're targeting the public to channel donations into fictitious funds. We're all aware of spam and junk mail, and these are some stats here from a well-known spam filter. And over the course of a 24-hour period, one day last week, they've examined the emails that have come into their systems. Almost 120,000 separate spam emails containing corona or COVID in the subject line in the course of a day. Over 16,000 unique subject lines were observed, and they originated from over 11,000 unique senders. You can look at this data on a daily basis yourself, and you'll find that it repeats with 20% either way variance every single day. That's an awful lot of phishing attempts that are making use of the opportunity that is COVID. What's more, a lot of these emails, if not most of them really, will contain an executable file or a link to one that would then infect your computers if it was clicked on. So let's see what they might look like, and why would any of us fall for something like that? And I think we've all learned not to do it, but we still seem to get victim to it. On the screen now, I'm showing the probably widely seen and very legitimate Johns Hopkins COVID-19 distribution map. You get to it via the Johns Hopkins University website, and it's become something of a go-to resource really for fact finders over the last few months, looking up the latest stats on infections, death rates, etc. The thing is though that Johns Hopkins University is a US higher education establishment. They don't really have an awful lot of need to canvass visitors across social networks such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and especially in the UK. So it's probably no surprise then that it's quickly been replicated and taken advantage of in great detail. And what it does is it contains the real-time data from the World Health Organization, and it's used as clickbait on social networking platforms by cyber criminals that just want to lure you into clicking on it. At which point the malicious map will contain what we call a payload preloader, and this basically means that it's going to have infected your device with malicious software faster than you can utter the word coronavirus. And just to be really clear on this, that the visual differences between the legitimate and the fake map are non-existent. The only way that you'd know the difference is usually when it's too late. But the subtle difference here is the web address. The legitimate Johns Hopkins one is hosted on the university website at coronavirus.jhu.edu. And the more malicious fake site would be accessible via something like coronavirusmap.com. Don't try and go there, by the way. If in any instance, and by which point, if you've clicked on that link, you've viewed the map, you've also likely, if you're doing it from a mobile device, installed an app, at which point you've handed over permissions and the hacker can access sensitive information from your phone that will include photos, media, files, even your device's location. They can also take pictures and record video, as well as remotely activate microphones and cameras. Since February, a number of Russian language cybercrime forums have been selling this digital coronavirus infection kit that uses this map as its bait, and it costs just $200 to buy. Fake news, specifically clickbait, like I've just touched on, are common techniques that are used by cyber criminals, and they rely on being able to take advantage of situations like this. But this stuff isn't new. It's just been, it's more of an opportunity now. It's been going on for years. The free quizzes, the free downloads, the free personality profiles, even the free virus removal tools in some instances that you're offered on the likes of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just the best advice that we can give is just to always be vigilant and always think before you click. These are not isolated incidents. According to a lot of reports now, cyber criminals are putting up thousands of coronavirus websites on a daily basis. Most of these sites are being used to host phishing attacks like the one we just saw, distribute malware-laced files for financial fraud, as David touched on, and also for tricking users into paying for fake COVID cures, supplements, vaccines, etc. Malware gangs, they're also using coronavirus email lures, and that's to trick you into downloading malware. And even state-sponsored hacking groups have jumped on the trend and adopted some similar tactics of late. The trend has become so obvious now that the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, the NCSC, have been issuing out security alerts about the rise in these coronavirus-related phishing campaigns. A bit more close to home, really. I mean, the increased need for collaboration across our remote teams has meant that the use of Dropbox and document sharing services has seen a big rise. We detected a big increase in phishing attacks leveraging the Dropbox file sharing emails. In the example shown there, you just click on that link, it will lead you to a fake Dropbox login page where if you've submitted your credentials, you provided some cyber criminals with full access to your account and your data. And there's another example there, just on the screen, slightly different. But the question to ask yourself is that if you were to fall victim to this, how much data would you have exposed? How much of that would be client data that is then protected under things like GDPR and causing you the extra burden and headache of having to potentially notify the ICO of a data breach? As our dependency on online shopping reaches new heights globally, attackers are also spoofing emails from payment processors like PayPal to steal your credentials and then carry out fraudulent transactions on the victim's account. And finally, there are conversations that used to happen face-to-face, in the office, they're now happening digitally. And so our reliance on communication tools is just massively increasing. There's an increase in scams that are relating to things like email providers. There's an Outlook storage scam on the screen there that sort of died off a little bit, I think, but has certainly seen quite a resurgence recently. Easy checks for these, like hovering over the hyperlinks to help you determine the legitimacy of an email or where that link is going to take you, are always good tips to use. But if in doubt, it's always about verification and validation. Just pick up the phone and check, look for another source of information. On that, really, I think a few tips that are really important to follow, not just during COVID-19. These threats have existed for years. It's just the opportunity of COVID now is presenting one to cyber criminals that's just too good to miss. Always keep your software updated, including your operating system, be that on your mobile phone, your tablet, or your PC, your antivirus. Make sure you're always using strong passwords. Where possible, use MFA, multi-factor authentication, for everything possible. Be vigilant, always think before you click, especially when you're using social networks or receiving unsolicited emails. If it's free, you don't know the source of it, it's probably malicious. If it's a dramatic headline or dramatic image, it's likely a scaremongering tactic to prompt you to click, what we call clickbait. Just verify these things for yourself. Open up a new Google search, look for the information yourself rather than clicking on links blindly. Interpol have provided a nice slogan on the slide there that should perhaps accompany the very important stay safe, stay at home, save the NHS that we're all so used to hearing right now. And that is be vigilant, be skeptical, and be safe. Okay, let's move on a little bit to how working from home impacts that security posture. It's something that most businesses are just having to adopt now in the wake of coronavirus. And many businesses have had to implement these new working practices without sometimes enough time for adequate thought or planning. It's been very much of a reaction for a lot of businesses. So I'm going to talk you really quickly now, I think, through the key factors that you should probably be considering to ensure that it remains business as usual throughout what are really unprecedented circumstances.
Hello, thank you.
Protecting your business from cybercrime must always be your biggest priority. You've probably got security covered in your offices already. Your computers will have antivirus software. You'll use a secure VPN. Your data is stored away nice and safely. But when your team starts to work from home, you're widening that exposure to potential threats, and cracks can quickly appear in your business's protection. I think really what you need to be sure that you're providing your employees with equipment and infrastructure in order for them to complete their normal duties from home. And the approach to take when doing this is, if it's not secure, there's just no point in having it. If an employee requires a laptop or computer, especially if they've got to access shared networks or data, it's really important that they're not using a personal device. For security reasons, it's much better to provide those employees with a work laptop or a computer that they can use strictly for work purposes. It's a great way to immediately minimize the risks to your business, and especially when it comes to ransomware. Next slide, please. If your employees do need to work from home, it's important that they're able to access everything that they need to fulfill their responsibilities, obviously. For smaller companies, I think it's key to make sure that all that data is in a location that's accessible to begin with. You might need to reconsider how and where you're saving your data and your files. We'd always advise to making sure that your data and your files are kept in one secure location and that is regularly backed up. Things like SharePoint, part of Office 365, are a great way to save files and access them safely from multiple locations and devices. Another thing for you to be thinking about is how those employees can access business applications and how your IT or IT provider can access your server infrastructure and workstations remotely. All of this can naturally seem quite daunting, but there's a really easy way to figure it out that we've found really helpful with our customers. On the slide there, you'll see a useful technique, and that is just for each department in your business, just think about all the different applications that are needed and then create a list before doing the same thing for each member in your team. You'll quickly be able to determine what applications are needed, who needs them, and how to give access to that safely. So if your employees do have to work from home, the obvious question to ask is, does the team have the equipment that they need to work remotely? With the majority of devices now being desktops, it's important to consider sooner rather than later if you need to buy laptops. Especially, the advice is to provide employees with safe and secure work laptops should they need to access any sort of shared networks, or if your business uses a VPN, etc. These are decisions really that you've got to think about carefully and ideally made in advance to ensure that devices that are required are available to buy. We've seen a massive increase in demand over the last month or so, obviously, and supply restrictions now due to manufacturing issues in China are also expediting a problem. What used to be a next day delivery laptop, it's now a 3 to 4 week back order for most people. You've also got to consider your telephony systems. If your team requires access to an internal phone system, could something like Microsoft Teams in Office 365 be a better way to minimize costs if you already have it? If you've got a hosted VoIP or cloud telephone system, have you considered and tested the remote working features that it might have? Some employees will always find working from home difficult. I think every effort should be made to ensure that they've got an appropriate workspace. Not suggesting really that you go and buy everyone a desk and chair, but certainly look to clarify with your employees that are working from home as to what their environment is and offer support where it's possible and appropriate, I guess, to make sure that they remain as focused at home as they are in the office. So for any business owner or manager, there's always the worry, I think, that employees aren't as productive working from home as they would be if they're in the office. So clear communication, collaboration, good management channels, they should always be implemented to make sure that the employees stay focused whilst working from home. It's, I think, a great opportunity as well just to look at your current processes, maybe with a view to improving them regardless of a coronavirus emergency. Especially if you're part of things like the Office 365 ecosystem, there are loads of applications in there that you already have access to and could probably make use of. So there we have it. I mean, there's 4 key considerations for your employees when working from home. As we've quickly learned, it's crucially important really to make sure that your business can continue operating throughout a pandemic situation like this, or any future emergency for that matter that we might find ourselves in. Business continuity planning is a real must. And when it comes to IT in your business, it's so much more than just, do I have a backup? There are lots of things to be considering. So a few takeaways then, if we, next slide please, just to recap what we've learned today. The threat landscape, it's a different place to what it was a month ago, and it's somewhat a lot different to what it was a year ago. And that's increased the risk, and it's also made it quite difficult for small businesses sometimes to keep up. The threats that we're seeing, they're stealthier, more complex than ever. Cyber criminals, they've only got to find a single weakness, and they'll use any means necessary to exploit and find those vulnerabilities. And COVID-19, as David suggested with some of the non-cyber related fraud matters there, it's a classic example of this. Dealing with it, recovering from security incidents can be really expensive. You've got to consider not if, but when, and you've got to plan for these things in advance. But the best thing that you can do, if there was one thing that you could do as a result of just trying to improve your cybersecurity, it's just to educate your users. Prevention is always better than cure, and you know, working in that industry, I can guarantee you it's often a lot cheaper. So I hope that's helped to understand really why cybersecurity posture is so important, firstly, not just during COVID-19, but also what we recommend businesses consider as workforces move now to a home working environment, which might not end. You know, business models are changing as a result of this, and we might find ourselves, you know, continuing this on voluntarily, certainly from a work model perspective. If anyone wants any further information, by all means get in touch with us either directly or through the chamber. We'll be happy to help. We'll be making some materials available as well after this, which will include a PDF version of the working from home information that I've gone through today, some additional remote working tips, a cybersecurity for employees ebook as well, which you can distribute amongst your staff to kick off really providing them with that really important security awareness training. That's it for me really. Thanks again for listening and for your time. I hope the information has been useful to you. Thanks very much.
Wow. David, Mike, thank you very much indeed. Superbly presented and took us from the very macro issues and what we're doing at a very senior level right down into the detail of what it actually means to me at home, which is absolutely the right positioning. David, if I come to you first, and then Mike, I'd like to draw you into it. A couple of weekends ago, Tim Parfitt, the economist, wrote in the Financial Times that as a world, we're not very good about learning, and we're very slow to pick up. And he pointed to predictions that Katrina would happen. He pointed to predictions that the pandemic would happen. And in fact, we knew so much about the pandemic in 2018, that we ran Project Cygnus. But actually, we didn't take any of that forward. It's always encouraging to note that as a small chamber here in South Wales, we do actually have somebody who's listening in India at the moment. And his question has prompted me to ask a slightly wider question, which is, what are we going to do as a result of what we're learning now to prepare ourselves for the next pandemic, which everybody says is broadly inevitable? David, if I could ask you first. You're just on mute, David, so just be careful.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and right up to the mark. Are we good at learning? You know who I think are brilliant at learning? The public sector. They're brilliant at learning. You can ask the military, we've asked the health service to prepare, we asked the police, my old force, you know, we grow them by 20%, we cut them by 25%. And every time they evolve. I like to think that, you know, my business, Guildhawk, and lots of clients we work with are extremely well prepared because we've got the greatest minds. But sadly, you're exactly right. We forget things. We will get through this. And, you know, like 1918, remember it came back in the October, wiped out lots more. And, you know, people will forget. They always forget. I showed you that slide, you know, and I'll give you an example. When was the last mass shooting in the United Kingdom? Sorry for the colleague in India, but whenever I ask that question, people go, oh, was it Dunblane? Was it this? No, it was Keswick. It was a mad taxi driver who went round shooting people, and it's one of the hardest places to respond to. Law enforcement and others prepare. We forget. That's the problem. And our job is, and this is where networks are so important, the lesson we can learn for this. You know, I'm not a know-it-all. I've done all those great things. I work with great people. worked with fantastic clients. I miss stuff. What did I miss? I'm one of the ones who sits on, we are ISO 27001 data security. We handle very sensitive data. We've got some really high product. We're international. I'm in there with clients. What did I miss? I was negotiating for the past 4 years about cyber protection. I missed pandemic. It's been on our national threat assessment for 4 years. If you've seen the BBC programs, a couple of friends sent to me, watch them. They're 3, 4 years old. They're foreseeing the future. So that's human nature. Let's put it to one side. Business must go on. What we must learn is that we've got systems in place of superb, some of the best technology. We've got to use those. That's why I'm saying report stuff. The other thing is we're stronger when we're together and united. That's it. We're not competing here. I'm not competing with any of my firms or others. We're all in this together. You said small. No, it's not small. It's strong. The thing about that unique thing where you've got units, I think why, South Wales, we're members of the Sheffield Chamber and the Lithuanian Chamber. Why are they? They're small, people would say. You know what? No, they're strong. SMEs shouldn't be small, medium enterprises. They're strong, medium enterprises. Strong. And you do that by talking, sharing. I've got a risk. Do I keep it to myself? And the lesson we must learn from the last crisis and the financial crisis and go right back to 1918, it's when people start forgetting or covering up at the time. We've got to be open, transparent, ultra transparent, and learn. What could we learn? I told you, you've already touched it. Do what we said, educate, make it fun. Don't make it scary, make it enjoyable. Romance, fraud, people will always fall for it. Arguably, people would say every romance has a bit of fraud, doesn't it? Educate, tell people, tell the police. I don't know if it's out, but you'll see some news coming out about, you'll be familiar to you, I won't tell anymore, but some arrests that are going down at the moment, thanks to people reporting. People tell me, how do we make the virtual world, one of the lessons we could all do in our businesses, I'm trying to do this, we've got our Friday session with all our people, including our furloughed people, make them feel part of it. Do you know what we haven't mentioned? And we've got to learn from, and I'm going to make a point of this, raising it at my group, is our officers in London and around the world, we've got high security on, we've got cameras, we've got alarm systems, central station. I'm comfortable that the City of London Police are there. I'm only down the road from the office anyway, but I'm comfortable they're there. If my team, your team, have got somebody at home sitting with all the credit cards, what do the villains say? They couldn't get into the credit card company because you had some quite hefty people, a lot of alarms if you went in there. So they used to try and collude. What they could do now is physical. Criminals, I'm not saying I've got any evidence of this, but if I were a criminal and I see the people, how scheming they are, I'd look for vulnerable people who've got the credit cards or got access to data. So let's think about who's got a a security rated door and alarms with central station to the police on their doors. I just popped out to pick up a thing there. Could come in, couldn't they? You wouldn't have to hack Zoom. You'd have somebody sitting here with, embarrassing me with whatever they do. if you got that. So think physical. This is where they will be, and then the physical protection, educating people, and making sure we're going to need a proper public inquiry after this to get the lessons out and make sure, not just for Britain, for the entire world. And I'm going to be one of the ones, hopefully with your support and other members, saying, you know what, we want to look at how prepared were we for this to protect businesses from fraud, cyber, and insurance and so on. So I'm going to do my absolute best, because I know it's good for my business and the country. You could do the same.
Thanks, David. Mike, any comments on that? Just from a
yeah, I think just from a cyber perspective, probably just to add to that, really. But I think lessons learned. What we've seen amongst our clients and across the industry is it should still be security first. Largely, I'm not saying that's your sole priority, but as an example, what we found was when this hit and everyone was starting to have to distance themselves and work from home, there was an awful lot of panic. It was, this person needs a laptop, this person's got to work from home. And it was as if, we take all of those precautions that we would normally take around devices and we throw them out the window just because we're reacting to a panic situation. I think the lesson to be learned there is that if you let that happen And so your security levels are dropping. At the same time, the opportunistic levels of cyber criminals are increasing. You're actually at a much amplified risk because your security levels are lower and the attacks are higher. So it's making sure, I think, lessons learned there is no matter what we're presented with, we must put security at the top of the list. There's a fine balance, obviously. The balance of security is so that you can do what you need to do while still remaining operational and being as safe as possible. But it's keeping that consideration there. And I think in planning, in preparation for another pandemic, or whatever it might be, I think it's making sure that we plan those business continuity documents, those strategies for continuing business in abnormal situations. I mean, we've got a business continuity plan, and most businesses probably have, but I'll confess that ours didn't contain a caveat for if the entire world was on lockdown and that nobody was able to go anywhere other than the supermarket. You don't consider those sorts of things and unless you've got a great foresight, I guess. But there will be other things that we're not considering. So, it's not just a fire to the building. It's not just a terrorist attack that we should be these things. There are other things that we must consider from a business continuity perspective. One of the risks for us really, working in the industry that we do in IT, we're in high demand. We're on the key worker list for the government. We're very much needed at a time like this. But the big risks to us in business continuity and business as usual are, number one, what happens if all of our staff fall ill? And number two, what happens if all of our customers are affected so greatly that they're all out of business? We could have all the business continuity plans in the world and be raring to go with remote working, but do we have the people to serve as customers, and do we have the people to deliver the service as staff?
Great, thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. And I think that's very, I mean, we're all thinking about an awful lot of things at the moment as businesses. We are thinking about customers, we're thinking about supply chains, we're thinking about cash flow. And one of the things that potentially we didn't really want to be thinking about was how secure are we on top of everything else that's worrying. Given that we've got an awful lot of businesses have now got staff working at home, I just wondered perhaps if you could give us a bit of an outline really as to what we can do to help prevent staff inadvertently affecting systems. I was just fascinated by, slightly worried actually, by the fact that 95% is due to human error and 91% is due to phishing emails. What can we do now today potentially to have a chat with our teams to help them keep us as safe as we can while we're working from home? Mike, I thought I'd come to you first.
Yeah, sure. I think, it's basic education. We show a brilliant video actually in some training sessions, and it sort of takes the phishing examples and puts them in real world face-to-face situations. We've all heard of the Nigerian prince that wants to send you $40 million just to look after him for a day and you can have a cut. But if somebody walked up to you in the street as a complete stranger and asked you that, you'd literally laugh in their faces. So a lot of it is just really give some thought to these things. When you look at something on a screen, what intention does somebody have in offering me this? Or what do I stand to gain from clicking on it, but what do I stand to lose if I click on it? Simple things that you can do. I mentioned just hovering over your links. We can spoof links in emails very easily, and we see it all the time. You'll see something that just says to access your quote, click here. You don't know where you're getting to until you get to the website. But if you just hover over that link, it will tell you the web address that you go into. And something as obvious as a PayPal email or a Barclays Bank email, whoever it might be, when you hover over that link, you're going to expect to see, HTTPS for a secure website. You can expect to see www.paypal.com. If it's pay.pal.ru, it's not paypal.com. Don't click on the links. Just go to the websites directly yourself. That's why everyone has, easy to know, easy to remember web addresses. Just try and get to the website yourself, or Google it and get to it as a result of a Google. And I think really just, the other thing I touched on it in what I said there, but two-factor, multi-factor authentication, it's one of the best ways we can really prevent these things from happening. And the premise behind that is really simple. It's It's not just your password. It's something that you know, as in your password or your PIN number, but also something that you have. That could be your mobile phone. I've actually got one on my desk here for the bank. It's a little DigiPass device that, when you log into your bank. But these things are available for everything. I must access about 20 systems a day through work, and everything that can enable multi-factor authentication is enabled. And it's really simple and straightforward. When I go to a website now and I log in, the first thing it does after my password is ask me for a code. I just open an app on my phone, and there are all the codes for everything I need, constantly changing every 30 seconds. And I just look at my phone and type in 6 numbers. But it means that if somebody's stolen that password, when they try and log in from Russia or America or wherever it might be, it's going to send a message to my device that's in my possession and not to them. So I'm immediately going to know that somebody's trying to get into that system, and I can immediately do something to stop it.
Thank you. And David, I guess from a fraud point of view, all of that applies, doesn't it? Is there anything additional that we should be looking at?
You're exactly right. When we talk about, cyber crime, cyber fraud, it's split, cyber enabled, where basically it's the same. We said, they used to send millions, if you remember, of letters and faxes and all the rest of it with the, I'm a prince and I've got money. Now they're doing it by email. They're using technology, Zoom, all the rest of it. They're all the same. It's the old, this is what the Cabinet Office and Cyber have said, that they're all the same things we had before. So it stands, the same thing is the same. All I'd add is, and it literally, thanks for raising those questions. It's got me on my list is, do we need to get more messages out to our friends there about physical things? We had it start about 2 years ago with particularly old people, so I'm the vulnerable, couriers going in, I'm from your bank, I need to collect your card, I'm a police officer, you've been defrauded. This is how scheming they are. They've defrauded somebody, then they go around and get them. Imagine that in our setting now. I'm not saying it's going to happen, there's no immediate case of this, but you said, how do we forecast and look at the future? If I put my criminal's head on and think in their shoes, I'd be thinking, right, I'm angry here, I'm not getting anything. I know where you live. I know that you work for the bank, that company. You must have cards. I'm going to pay you a little visit, come and help me. Trick you, burglary, whatever. So let's have a look at planning and testing. And the way you do that, as we were saying before, we're all having socials. Try and make it, light-hearted. I know with some of our clients that we work with, and thanks for lots of them, paying up, good firms, all sending work. This is where we work collaboratively, isn't it? But reminding each other on tests, what would you do if this happened? What would you do if that happened? Don't just let anybody in. Don't, like now, you can see my lovely photographs, but making sure we can't give too much away about where we are or seeing passwords and so on. Very easy to do that, which you wouldn't do at work, would you, Mike? You wouldn't be allowed to.
No.
We don't have people showing things.
There was a very high-profile case, wasn't there, of the TV crews inside the Cobra meeting at Downing Street, and
really, yeah,
Boris Johnson's Zoom meeting ID on the screen behind him.
Oh, so and that's it. But anybody can make that mistake. What we've got to do is keep a level of structure, order, and discipline, isn't it? And that really comes to, I know it's difficult. Where I live in a tiny apartment in London. Really noisy out there. Don't have a garden, but we've got to have that structure and order to your day. Helps productivity, also helps mental well-being. I put a tie on regularly. I know others, people find it funny. It's part of my regime. I've always done this, Friday's normally white tie, but it's dressed out Friday. But it's the psyche of just keep structured. You'll never get everything, but let's not miss it. Remember, the physical world is important too. And because we are tactile people, we like to meet, and that's why we talk. There's the buzzer going, there's somebody else delivering something. I'm not going to answer.
While you deal with that, David, while you deal with your pizza delivery, let me just ping one at Mike. Mike, this whole crisis has seen us move to using very different systems, and I'm old enough to remember when actually we used to handwrite things and send it by fax. That was modern technology in those days. And then we moved to email, and now we're moving away from email, and we're working on collaborative platforms such as Slack and Teams and all of that sort of space. Are there additional precautions that you should take to cover that migration?
I think it's just about, I touched on it when it comes to planning for disaster or continuity planning really, but I think it's just about making sure that you do it properly. If you do anything in a reactive way, reacting to a situation as opposed to planning for it in advance, you're going to do it differently. So I think it's about, if you're moving your data to the cloud, then you need to take the time to think about where that data is going to be, how it's going to be laid out, who's going to access it, and you refresh the view on that, I guess. Also, then if we're moving to a thing like remote working and you're using Zoom or Teams or whatever that might be, it's about making sure that you take the time to really consider it. You'll have policies in your handbooks for lone working. You'll have policies in your handbooks for traveling between customers or vendors. You're going to start to need to think of these policies for what is appropriate and what are the standards and the policies you want to be using for doing remote working, for scheduling meetings. One thing that I think I've become victim of throughout all this is that I oversubscribe my time. Because you're not traveling anywhere, all of a sudden you just think, well, that meeting will finish then, start another one then. And before you know it, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you actually haven't stopped talking all day. Yeah. So I think it's just, the risks are, I think, there are obviously security risks, cybersecurity risks to doing these things, but you can mitigate many of them by seeking professional advice when you do it and planning for it properly, as opposed to that just quick knee-jerk reaction.
Thank you. That's been a hugely helpful session. Yeah. I think the people on the call will have found some really interesting tips and some very practical things that we can take away into businesses. I think we could have kept going for a lot longer, actually.
Heather, could I just throw one in?
Go on.
It's bizarre, isn't it? We're talking about physical security. I've just got the courier turned up at my home address to sign the annual report and accounts off again from the accountants for our charity. And we're back to that physical world thing, aren't we? How do we check who's doing what? That paper and pen still exists. Keep your physical security as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point to end on. Thank you, David, and really thanks to both of you, to David and to Mike, for what's been an absolutely fascinating session. The heads up on areas we should start with has been really, really helpful. To our attendees, thank you for joining the session, especially from joining us from India. That's hugely impressive, and a fantastic question as well. If we didn't answer any of the questions, we can obviously connect you at a later date. And as you know, we've recorded this session, so you will be able to revisit it and pick up those tips. And we have the slides as well that we can share. As we've said, it's not formal advice, and we do have an up-to-date coronavirus hub on the Chamber website, so please do visit that. And from myself, Paul, and the entire Chamber team, I wish you a safe systems, hack-free, fraud-free systems, and have a very happy weekend. Thank you to you all, and goodbye from us.
Thank you.